holy shit, why did you do this? Like, you know that you're guilty, and you agreed to do this interview? Like, this isn't even the cops, and you're clearly full of shit and really nervous. This is crazy. The whole thing's crazy.
What if everything you thought you knew about the Sussex marriage was only the surface of a much darker truth? What if behind the polished photographs, the staged smiles, and the carefully managed public statements, there was a scandal so dangerous, so outrageous, that even the royal family itself scrambled to contain it? Tonight, we peel back the curtain on a revelation that shakes the very foundations of the House of Windsor. Sarah Ferguson herself has broken her silence about Meghan Markle's alleged scandalous affair with none other than Prince Andrew. And yes, she has revealed it was real. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The words hang heavy, don't they? Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew. It almost sounds too shocking to believe, a combination of names that makes the air stand still. But Sarah's revelation wasn't whispered in secrecy. No, this was deliberate, cutting, and impossible to dismiss. The Duchess of York, a woman who has lived her life in the crosshairs of the press, decided to reveal what she claims she saw and knew. And when she did, it wasn't Meghan who came out looking exposed. It wasn't even Andrew. It was Harry. The man who had defended Meghan at every turn suddenly appeared as the one humiliated, the one trapped, the one silenced by fear. Let me ask you something. What could be more humiliating than realizing your own wife may have been too close, far too close, with your disgraced uncle? Could you imagine the storm of betrayal, the nights of suspicion, the endless cycle of paranoia? That's exactly the position Sarah claims Harry found himself in. And here's the cruelest part. He couldn't even say it out loud. He couldn't go public. He couldn't confront it in front of the cameras, because the cost of such humiliation would be devastating not only for him, but for the monarchy itself.
Choosing to, as it were, get out there and talk about these things, it's almost a mental health issue to some extent for me, in the sense that it's been nagging at my mind for a great many years. I know that I made the wrong judgment and I made the wrong decision, but I made the wrong decision and the wrong judgment, I believe.
But this isn't just about Harry. It isn't just about Meghan. This is about Sarah Ferguson, the woman who carried this secret like a weight on her shoulders. For years, she kept her silence. For years, she let the whispers circulate in back corridors, at private dinners, at those quiet little meetings the press never gets to see. Until now, she finally decided to pull the plug. Why? That's what we're here to uncover. From the beginning, Sarah's life has been marked by scandal. She knows better than most what it feels like to be the subject of tabloid gossip. She knows the cruelty of headlines, the sting of paparazzi lenses, the sharp bite of betrayal. That's why her words carry so much power. She isn't speaking as an outsider pointing fingers. She's speaking as someone who has lived within the heart of the storm, someone who has seen both sides of the royal machine, its dazzling public face and its toxic, suffocating underbelly. So when Sarah Ferguson points her finger and says Meghan crossed a line with Andrew, people listen. The question is, should we? That's what makes this story so electrifying. On one hand, it's Sarah's testimony, her version of events. On the other, it's Meghan Markle, a woman already accused of secrets, manipulations, and betrayals. And caught in the middle, Prince Harry, whose very silence has become its own damning evidence. Let's rewind the tape for a moment. Imagine the palace corridors at twilight, the whispers of staff who know more than they say, the coded language exchanged between royals who never reveal their full hand. In that world, rumors are currency. A glance, a laugh at the wrong moment, a dinner that lasts too long, all of it becomes evidence. And the rumor that Meghan Markle was getting too close to Andrew wasn't just idle chatter. According to Sarah, it was fuel. Fuel that lit the fire of jealousy in Harry's heart. Fuel that led to nights of shouting, to accusations hurled across gilded rooms, to a tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Picture this. Harry and Meghan, the so-called modern faces of the monarchy, fighting behind closed doors. Harry demanding answers. Meghan brushing him off. You're paranoid, Harry. You're imagining things. But was he? Sarah says no. Sarah says he was right to be suspicious. And that single statement, coming from her, is like dynamite. Now ask yourself, why would Sarah Ferguson of all people decide to blow the lid on this? What does she gain by exposing Meghan in this way? Some might say it's revenge, payback for the countless times Meghan has distanced herself from the Yorks, from Andrew, from the scandals she wanted no part of. Others might argue it's loyalty, that Sarah wanted to protect Harry, to defend him in the only way she could. Still, there are those who believe this is bigger than Sarah herself, that she was pressured, nudged, or even encouraged by other members of the royal family to go public. After all, Sarah isn't just speaking as a woman. She's speaking as Andrew's ex-wife, the mother of his children, a figure who has always been in his corner despite his controversies. And that leads us to the cruel irony. Meghan, a woman who has spent years carefully curating her image as the misunderstood outsider, is suddenly cast in the same shadow that destroyed Andrew. The same shadow Sarah herself fought to escape. And Harry, poor Harry, becomes the man too scared to call it out. Because think about it. If he admitted it, if he confirmed Sarah's story, what would that make him? A prince humiliated by his own wife and betrayed by his own uncle. This is the emotional heart of the story. Not Meghan's alleged affair, not Andrew's role in it, but Harry's silence, his inability to fight back, his decision to swallow his pride and carry on as though nothing happened. And that silence, that deafening, painful silence, has become the loudest noise of all. So why does this matter now? Why is Sarah speaking in this moment, years after the whispers first began? Because timing is everything. Meghan is vulnerable now, her Hollywood projects collapsing, her reputation in tatters. Andrew, too, is more disgraced than ever. Harry is isolated, far from the palace that once defined him, clinging to relevance through memoirs and media deals. And Sarah? Sarah has found her voice. But let's not forget, the royals don't move without purpose. When one of them speaks, especially in such a dramatic and damaging way, it's rarely spontaneous. Sarah's words may be her own, but the ripples they create, those serve the monarchy. And maybe, just maybe, Sarah's revelation is part of a much larger strategy, one designed to remind Meghan of her place, to remind Harry of his weakness, and to remind the public that no scandal goes unanswered. And this is where it gets chilling. Because if Sarah's revelation is true, then Meghan didn't just betray Harry. She betrayed the monarchy itself. She crossed a line no outsider was ever meant to cross. And if it's not true, then the monarchy has just unleashed a devastating smear campaign, using Sarah as its weapon. Either way, the result is the same. Meghan loses, Harry suffers, and the royal machine keeps turning. But what happens next? Does Sarah reveal more? Does Meghan fight back? Does Harry finally speak? The story is still unfolding, and every moment drips with tension. And as we step deeper into this labyrinth of secrets, lies, and betrayals, remember this. Sarah's revelation was only the beginning. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the whispers at a royal dinner weren't whispers at all, but warning shots? What if the very first seeds of this scandal weren't planted by the press, but by uneasy glances, half-finished sentences, and the kind of laughter that lingers a beat too long? That's where Sarah Ferguson begins her account. She doesn't start with public drama. She doesn't start with cameras or headlines. She starts in the one place the public almost never sees, inside the palaces themselves, where polished chandeliers reflect secrets far too heavy for their golden ceilings to bear. Imagine it. The York family gathered for a private meal. The tension unspoken, but thick. Prince Andrew at one end of the table, Meghan Markle not seated beside him, but close enough that every shared look felt charged. Harry, smiling, trying to appear relaxed, yet his eyes betraying unease. Sarah, ever the observer, watching it unfold like a scene in a play where she already knew the ending. This wasn't speculation. This was an atmosphere, a sense. The first moment that whispers of Meghan's closeness to Andrew drifted through the room like smoke before a fire. Sarah claims it was subtle at first. A laugh here, a hand brushing against a shoulder as plates were cleared. The kind of gestures that in isolation meant nothing, but together? Together, they painted a picture no one dared name. Have you ever noticed how sometimes silence speaks louder than words? That's what Sarah felt. A silence between Meghan and Andrew that didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of something unspoken, something dangerous. And here's the contradiction that makes it so compelling. Meghan, the woman who publicly distanced herself from Andrew's scandals, who went out of her way to appear uninvolved with him, was allegedly doing the opposite behind closed doors. Isn't that the cruel irony? The more she rejected him in public, the more she leaned toward him in private. And Sarah, who had spent decades surviving her own royal storms, recognized the pattern. She knew what she was looking at. Now pause for a moment and think. If you were Harry, what would you do? You're sitting in that room, watching your wife laugh with a man who carries one of the darkest reputations in the royal family. Do you ignore it? Do you confront her later? Or do you bury it so deep that it begins to eat you alive? Sarah says Harry tried the third option first. He stayed quiet. He swallowed his suspicions. But even in his silence, Sarah could see it. She could see the way his jaw tightened, the way his hand clutched the wine glass just a little too firmly. He was a man pretending everything was fine, while inside he was unraveling. The dinner ended. But the whispers didn't. Staff noticed. Other royals noticed. And in a family built on gossip, built on the weaponization of perception, once the whispers began, they could never be contained. The Yorks talked. The Sussexes fought. The palace machine hummed. And Sarah, in her own words, began to carry the knowledge like a stone pressing down on her chest. She admits something chilling. She didn't just suspect. She saw moments she could never forget. A late-night corridor meeting where Meghan and Andrew stood closer than they should have. A private conversation that ended with Meghan touching Andrew's arm just a little too long. A glance across the room that spoke volumes. Do you see what's happening here? This wasn't hearsay. This was observation. And Sarah, who had once been mocked for her own indiscretions, wasn't about to misinterpret what she saw. But here's the twist. Sarah didn't speak. Not then. She let the whispers grow, let them morph into rumors, let them swirl through Kensington and Buckingham like ghosts no one could exorcise. Why? Because she understood the danger. To accuse Meghan publicly without proof would invite war. To confide in Harry would wound him. To say nothing was cowardice. Yet it was the path she chose. And that silence gnawed at her. You might ask, why should we take Sarah's word now, when she chose to say nothing then? That's the heart of the contradiction. Sarah Ferguson, known for her scandals, her mistakes, her resilience, now positions herself as a truth-teller. And perhaps that's what makes her confession so potent. It isn't polished. It isn't carefully orchestrated. It comes from years of guilt, years of watching Harry suffer in silence. Because yes, Harry noticed. How could he not? Sarah claims the tension between Harry and Meghan escalated quickly after those dinners. The arguments weren't daily at first, but they were fierce. Harry's jealousy, Meghan's dismissals. You're imagining things, Harry, she allegedly told him. You're paranoid. But paranoia only works as an excuse for so long. When a man begins to see the same pattern repeated, the glances, the laughter, the late-night absences, paranoia becomes suspicion. Suspicion becomes anger. And anger becomes destruction. Let's talk about that night. Sarah says there was one night that cemented everything for her. A gala evening where Andrew and Meghan's proximity became undeniable. Guests noticed. Sarah noticed. And Harry? He burned. He kept his composure publicly, smiling for the cameras. But when they returned home, the storm broke. A shouting match that echoed through the walls. Meghan accusing Harry of mistrust. Harry accusing Meghan of betrayal. The details Sarah reveals are raw. Harry pacing, Meghan defiant, the sound of something, perhaps a glass, breaking in the distance. Can you feel the weight of that image? A prince, stripped of his power, begging for reassurance. A duchess, calm and dismissive, insisting he was losing his mind. And Sarah, the silent witness, piecing together the truth she could no longer ignore. But even then, Sarah didn't speak. Not to the press. Not to the family at large. She stayed silent, and the rumors spread like wildfire anyway. And this is where we hit the cruel twist of fate. The very woman who once begged for understanding during her own scandals became complicit in another by refusing to act. Her silence was its own betrayal. Not to Meghan, not to Andrew, but to Harry. Because think about this. What if Harry had known the full extent of what Sarah saw? What if he had heard it from her lips instead of whispers in the shadows? Would he have confronted Meghan more forcefully? Would he have left? Or would he have chosen, as he always seemed to, silence? And that's where Sarah's revelation cuts deepest. Not in exposing Meghan, not even in embarrassing Andrew, but in reminding the world that Harry suspected all along. That he knew, that he lived with betrayal, but feared humiliation more than he craved truth. Do you see why this matters now? This isn't just another royal scandal. This is the scandal that redefines Harry's marriage, Meghan's credibility, and Sarah's own place in the royal saga. It's not about dinner tables or corridor glances. It's about a family where silence has always been deadlier than words. But here's the cliffhanger, the one you've been waiting for. Sarah says that one night, those whispers transformed into undeniable proof. Proof so damning that Harry could never deny it again. Proof that Meghan's closeness with Andrew wasn't just rumor. And what that proof was, is where this story takes its most shocking turn. What kind of proof could rip apart not just a marriage, but the very illusion of loyalty inside the royal family? What could Sarah Ferguson have seen or heard that was so undeniable, so impossible to dismiss, that even Harry himself could no longer pretend it was paranoia? This is where Sarah's silence cracked. For years, she had been the Duchess who swallowed her secrets, the woman who bore the weight of other people's sins. But eventually, the truth became too heavy. And when she finally opened her mouth, what poured out was a revelation no one was prepared for. According to Sarah, it wasn't just whispers anymore. It wasn't just stolen glances or corridor conversations. It was something tangible, something real. She describes walking into a private lounge at Royal Lodge, Andrew's residence, late one evening. She hadn't expected anyone to be there, but there they were. Meghan, Andrew, the two of them sitting closer than propriety would ever allow. Not touching, but close enough that the space between them was charged. Meghan laughing in a way Sarah claims she had never seen her laugh with Harry. Andrew leaning in, his voice low, intimate. Now pause for a second. Picture that. Meghan Markle, the woman who presented herself as the modern face of royal independence, caught in a scene that looked more like collusion than casual conversation. Andrew, disgraced, clinging to relevance, finding comfort in someone who was supposed to despise him. Doesn't it sound absurd? Contradictory? But that's what makes it so shocking. Sarah says she froze in that moment. Should she walk away? Should she announce herself? Instead, she lingered just long enough for her instincts to scream at her. This wasn't innocent. This wasn't normal. This was the moment the whispers crystallized into proof. And though no physical line was crossed in front of her eyes, Sarah says she could feel it, the betrayal hanging in the air. But here's where the story twists yet again. Sarah didn't tell Harry. Not that night. Not even in the weeks that followed. Why? Because she was terrified. Terrified of what it would unleash. Terrified of what it would mean for her daughters, still tied to Andrew. Terrified of what Meghan could do if she turned her wrath toward her. So she chose silence. Again. But silence is never neutral, is it? Silence protects someone while destroying someone else. And in this case, Sarah's silence protected Meghan and destroyed Harry. Let's dig deeper into Harry's world at this time. He was already fragile. His relationship with the firm fractured. His bond with William strained. His move to America casting him as the outsider prince. And now, behind closed doors, he was battling suspicions he couldn't even articulate. According to Sarah, Meghan and Harry's arguments grew more heated after her late-night observation. It was as though Meghan, knowing she was untouchable in Harry's eyes, pushed him harder. "You're imagining things," she allegedly told him again and again. "You're just jealous." But how many times can a man be told he's paranoid before he begins to believe it? Sarah claims Harry did believe it, at least on the surface. He let Meghan's dismissal silence him. Yet underneath, the fire of jealousy burned hotter than ever. And it was that fire that Sarah says she could no longer ignore. Do you see the cruel irony here? Meghan built her brand on independence, on rejecting the institution's darkest corners. Yet here she was, allegedly intertwined with one of its most disgraced figures. Andrew, the very name Meghan tried to avoid, becoming the name whispered in her orbit. And Sarah, once mocked for her lack of restraint, now the reluctant truth-teller. The contradictions pile up, and with each one, the story only grows more compelling. Sarah eventually reached a breaking point. She describes confiding in a close friend, someone outside the immediate family circle, about what she had seen. She couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. And in that moment of confession, she realized something chilling. If she could see it, if she could feel it, then others surely had as well. She wasn't alone, which meant the scandal wasn't just a rumor waiting to explode. It was a time bomb. But here's the kicker. Sarah insists she didn't go public to destroy Meghan. She claims she did it to protect Harry, to free him from the prison of silence he had locked himself into. Can you imagine carrying that kind of burden? Watching a man you once saw as joyful, cheeky, full of life, reduced to someone paranoid, suspicious, and afraid to speak? That's what Sarah says pushed her to finally reveal the truth. Now, let's question motives for a moment. Do you believe Sarah was really trying to protect Harry? Or was this about shielding Andrew, deflecting suspicion by putting Meghan in the spotlight instead? That's the contradiction at the heart of her revelation. And it's a contradiction that keeps us hooked, because in the royal family, nothing. Sarah's confession set off shockwaves behind the scenes. The Yorks reeled, the Sussexes burned, and palace staff whispered more loudly than ever. But still, Harry said nothing. He stayed silent, choosing humiliation over confrontation. And that silence, Sarah claims, was the most tragic part of all. Because imagine this, your wife accused of betrayal, your uncle implicated, your own relative, your aunt, no less, confirming what you've long suspected. And yet you, a prince of the blood, say nothing, not to defend yourself, not to defend her. You stand mute, trapped in the fear of public ridicule. Doesn't that silence speak louder than any denial ever could? Sarah paints a picture of Harry as a man cornered by his own fears. Fears of the tabloids, fears of becoming a laughingstock, fears of the monarchy washing its hands of him completely if he dared speak the truth. And Meghan, Sarah claims, exploited those fears expertly. Say nothing, she allegedly told him. Silence is strength. But was it? Or was it surrender? And that brings us to the moment Sarah describes as the breaking point. Not for Meghan, not for Andrew, but for Harry. She says there was one argument, one so brutal, so raw, that it left Harry in tears. That was the moment she realized this wasn't just scandal. It was tragedy. It was a man unraveling under the weight of betrayal he couldn't even admit. What exactly was said in that argument? Sarah claims to know. And if she's telling the truth, it changes everything we thought we knew about the Sussex marriage. Because the words Meghan allegedly used cut deeper than betrayal itself. And those words, those brutal, unforgettable words, are where this story plunges into its darkest chapter yet. What words could break a prince? What words could pierce through titles, wealth, and royal armor, leaving nothing but a man standing naked in his pain? Sarah Ferguson claims she knows exactly what was said during that devastating argument. The one that left Harry in tears. And if she's right, it was more than betrayal. It was humiliation. Picture the scene. Harry and Meghan in the privacy of their California home. The world outside saw sunshine, celebrity friends, and a life of freedom. But inside those walls, fury, suspicion, accusations hurled back and forth like knives. Sarah's account paints Harry pacing the floor, his voice rising, demanding to know why Meghan was always disappearing into her own world, why whispers linked her name with Andrew's. And Meghan's response? Cold, calculated, crushing. According to Sarah, Meghan allegedly snapped back. It was nothing serious, Harry. Not everything is about you. You're overreacting. Do you feel the sting of those words? Not everything is about you. For a man raised in the shadow of his brother, a man who spent his life feeling like despair, those words hit deeper than any accusation. It wasn't just a denial, it was dismissal. It was telling Harry that his pain, his fears, his very existence in this marriage didn't matter. Sarah says Harry's face crumpled at that moment. The anger drained, replaced with something worse, shame. Shame that he'd asked. Shame that he cared. Shame that his wife could reduce him to paranoia with a single sentence. And Sarah, who had lived through her own betrayals, recognized the look instantly. She calls it the look of a man who realizes he is powerless. Now let me ask you, audience, what would you do in Harry's shoes? Would you press harder, demand the truth, risk tearing apart the fragile life you built? Or would you do what Harry did? Retreat into silence, terrified of what the world would say if it knew the truth. Because according to Sarah, Harry chose silence. Again, but silence doesn't heal. It festers. It builds. It turns suspicion into poison. And that's exactly what began to unravel Harry from within. Sarah claims that after that argument, Harry's demeanor changed. He became more withdrawn, more cautious in public. The cheeky grin, the mischief in his eyes, gone. Instead, he smiled too widely for the cameras, overcompensating, while behind closed doors, the walls of his marriage cracked wider. Here's the contradiction that makes this story unbearable. Meghan built her brand on speaking out, on challenging silence, on refusing to be controlled. Yet she allegedly demanded Harry's silence when it came to her own indiscretions. Isn't that the cruelest twist? The woman who told the world she'd never be silenced her own husband. Sarah says that Meghan weaponized Harry's greatest fear, public humiliation. Imagine the headlines. Meghan betrays Harry with Andrew. Could you picture it splashed across every newspaper, every social feed? Harry could. And that's why, Sarah claims, he bit his tongue. Better to swallow betrayal than to live with humiliation. But here's the thing. A marriage cannot survive on silence alone. It becomes a performance. A stage play where both actors know their lines, but none of it feels real. And for Harry and Meghan, that performance became their reality. The Netflix deals, the Oprah interview, the speeches about love and unity. All of it scripted over the cracks that Sarah says she knew were there all along. Let's step back for a moment and talk about Sarah herself. Why reveal these words now? Why expose the most vulnerable wound of her nephew-in-law? Some argue it's revenge. Revenge against Meghan for the way she distanced herself from Andrew, for the way she seemed to rise above the Yorks. Others believe it's Sarah's attempt at redemption. By telling the truth, however ugly, she positions herself as the one who dared to say what everyone else was too afraid to. But maybe, just maybe, it's both. Because Sarah knows better than anyone the cost of silence. She knows what happens when secrets fester, when scandals are swept under carpets until the bulge becomes impossible to ignore. And she wasn't about to let Harry rot in his silence forever. Not when she could shatter it with a single confession. And so, the affair rumor transformed into something more. It wasn't just a question of whether Meghan crossed a line with Andrew. It became a story of Harry's slow unraveling. His fears mocked. His suspicions dismissed. His tears brushed aside as paranoia. Sarah says that night was the turning point. From then on, Harry no longer fought. He complied. He smiled. He played the role Meghan demanded. And in doing so, he lost a piece of himself. Doesn't that strike you as tragic? A man who fought wars, who walked behind his mother's coffin before the eyes of the world, reduced to silence in his own home. And here's where the twist takes us deeper. That night, Sarah claims, wasn't just about Meghan's dismissive words. It was about what followed. Because Meghan, emboldened by Harry's retreat, allegedly began to wield those words like a weapon. You're paranoid, Harry. You're insecure, Harry. You're imagining things. Each phrase cutting him down, piece by piece, until he questioned not her loyalty, but his sanity. This is where jealousy becomes tragedy. This is where a marriage becomes a prison. Harry wasn't just suspicious of betrayal. He was suspicious of himself. And that, Sarah insists, is the cruelest betrayal of all. But what do you think? Was Meghan truly dismissing because there was nothing to hide? Or was she dismissing because the truth was too dangerous to admit? That's the question Sarah forces us to confront. And just when you think it can't get darker, Sarah reveals something even more chilling. She says one of their most explosive arguments didn't end with Harry's tears. It ended with silence, so sharp it felt like the end of everything. Meghan, stone-faced. Harry, broken. And Sarah swears she heard him whisper something under his breath that night. A phrase so haunting it still echoes in her mind. A phrase that suggested Harry wasn't just afraid of humiliation. He was afraid of something far worse. And what he whispered is the revelation that takes this scandal to a whole new level. Section complete. Would you like me to continue directly into Chapter 4? What could a man like Harry whisper in the dead of night that would haunt Sarah Ferguson forever? What words, so soft they were almost swallowed by silence, could reveal the depth of a prince's despair? Sarah claims she heard him murmur it after one of those vicious arguments, when Meghan's face was cold, her arms folded, and Harry's tears stained the room like invisible ink. And what he whispered wasn't anger. It wasn't even accusation. It was fear. I don't know who to trust anymore. Think about that for a second. Not, I don't trust you. Not, you betrayed me. But, I don't know who to trust anymore. Those words tell a story of a man unmoored, lost in a sea where the people closest to him might be his very undoing. Can you imagine living like that? Every smile doubted. Every word second-guessed. Every silence heavy with suspicion. Sarah says those words chilled her, because she recognized them. She had whispered them herself decades earlier, when her marriage to Andrew crumbled under the weight of scandal and betrayal. She knew what it meant when trust no longer existed. It meant the marriage wasn't just strained, it was broken. And yet, Harry stayed. That's the contradiction that makes this story so compelling. He knew something was wrong. He felt betrayed. But he stayed anyway. Why? Was it love? Was it fear? Or was it the knowledge that walking away would unleash a humiliation he could never survive? This is where Sarah's insight becomes brutal. She says Meghan didn't just win arguments. She won control. By dismissing Harry's suspicions, by calling him paranoid, she turned his doubts inward. He stopped questioning her. He started questioning himself. That's the genius of psychological warfare. You don't deny the crime. You deny the person accusing you until they no longer trust their own eyes. And Harry, raised in the brutal fishbowl of monarchy, was the perfect target. His entire life, he had been told what to think, what to feel, how to act. His rebellion against the firm gave him a taste of independence, but it didn't prepare him for a marriage where he'd need to defend himself against the person he trusted most. Sarah describes it like watching a man suffocate in plain sight. He smiled in public. He performed the role of the supportive husband. But in private, the arguments became darker, more cutting, and the jealousy that once drove Harry to shout became something quieter, something more dangerous, a kind of simmering despair. Let me ask you this. Have you ever seen someone who once burned with fire slowly lose their spark? That's what Sarah says happened to Harry. The boy who once joked with photographers, who once lit up rooms with mischief, was reduced to a man walking on eggshells in his own home. And Meghan, according to Sarah, knew it. She knew the effect her words had. She knew that every time she called him insecure or paranoid, it pushed him further into silence. Now, let's talk about Andrew for a moment. Because we can't forget he's at the center of this storm too. Sarah says the alleged closeness between Meghan and Andrew wasn't just a betrayal of Harry. It was a weapon. Andrew, disgraced and isolated, found a strange power in being linked to Meghan. And Meghan, whether intentionally or not, gave him that power. For Andrew, it was validation. For Meghan, it was control. For Harry, it was humiliation. But what happens when humiliation festers too long? It transforms. It becomes resentment. And resentment, Sarah insists, was the poison that began to seep into Harry and Meghan's marriage after that whispered line. I don't know who to trust anymore. Sarah says it changed everything. From that point on, Harry no longer fought with Meghan in the same way. He didn't accuse her outright. He didn't demand answers. Instead, he retreated. He became quiet, passive. And Meghan, instead of softening, hardened. Their relationship wasn't a partnership anymore. It was a performance layered over a battlefield. The most shocking part? Sarah suggests that even Meghan's dismissive tone, telling Harry it was nothing serious with Andrew, wasn't just cruelty. It was confession in disguise. Think about it. If there was truly nothing, why not deny it outright? Why not laugh at the absurdity of the rumor? Instead, she told Harry he was overreacting, as if admitting there had been something, but minimizing its importance. And that's what Sarah says broke Harry most of all. The possibility that Meghan didn't even consider it betrayal. This is where the story takes a darker twist. Sarah reveals that one evening, after another heated fight, Meghan allegedly walked away muttering words Harry wasn't supposed to hear. You'll never leave me. You're too scared. Let that sink in. You're too scared. According to Sarah, those words became the unspoken truth of their marriage. Meghan knew Harry feared humiliation more than anything. She knew he feared being mocked by the world, painted as the fool prince who lost his wife to his disgraced uncle. And so, she wielded that fear like a sword. Does that sound like love to you? Or does it sound like power? That's the question Sarah forces us to wrestle with. And it's the question that leaves Harry's silence looking less like choice and more like captivity. But the tension didn't stay hidden forever. Sarah says there was one night, one fateful night, when jealousy boiled over and everything that had been whispered in shadows threatened to explode into the open. A night where Harry's restraint finally cracked. A night where Meghan's dismissals no longer worked. And what happened that night, Sarah insists, was so explosive, so dangerous, that it nearly ripped the entire facade apart. Because that was the night the shouting wasn't behind closed doors anymore. It was in front of others. And once others saw it, there was no putting the pieces back together again. What happens when the private cracks of a marriage spill into the public eye? What happens when the shouting that was once muffled by walls becomes audible to witnesses who were never meant to hear it? Sarah Ferguson swears that night came. The night Harry and Meghan's storm escaped the confines of their home and rattled the fragile facade they worked so hard to maintain. It was supposed to be a night of elegance. A palace gathering, smaller than a gala but formal enough that appearances mattered. The kind of event where every bow, every handshake, every smile is analyzed. And in that room, under the golden chandeliers and velvet curtains, Meghan and Harry were expected to shine as the modern, progressive royals they had branded themselves to be. But instead, their private war leaked through the cracks. Sarah recalls the tension being visible from the moment they arrived. Meghan dazzling in her gown, Harry stiff in his tuxedo. She smiled for the cameras, waved with practiced ease. He forced a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. To the public, they looked perfect. To those inside the room, they looked like a couple teetering on the edge. The breaking point came midway through the evening. A conversation, seemingly innocent, that triggered Harry's worst fears. Meghan, standing just a little too close to Andrew, laughing at something he said. That same laugh Sarah remembered from Royal Lodge. Harry watching, frozen, his jaw tightening with every second. And then, the spark. Witnesses later whispered that Harry approached Meghan with a look of fury barely masked by politeness. Their words weren't loud at first, but the tension radiated. Meghan, dismissive, brushing off his whispers. Harry, unable to hold back, raising his voice. "Why are you always with him?" The words weren't shouted, but they were sharp enough to cut through the murmur of the room. Heads turned. Glasses paused midair. The mask had slipped. Can you imagine that moment? A royal gathering, built on poise and appearances, shattered by a husband and wife locked in a very human, very ugly fight. Sarah says her heart sank. She knew once witnesses saw it, there was no turning back. The rumor wasn't rumor anymore. It was spectacle. And Meghan's response? That's what stunned Sarah the most. She didn't soften. She didn't placate. She laughed. A short, sharp laugh, dripping with irony. Not everything is about you, Harry. The same words she'd used in private, now in a room full of people. The effect on Harry was immediate. His face reddened, his fists clenched. But then came the most heartbreaking part. He said nothing. He swallowed it. He turned away, retreating into silence as Meghan continued her performance, smiling, chatting, pretending nothing had happened. And that silence, that familiar, suffocating silence, was what the witnesses remembered most. Not Meghan's laughter, not Andrew's presence, Harry's silence. Sarah describes the atmosphere shifting after that moment. Conversations grew stilted. Guests avoided eye contact. The tension was a fog that lingered over the evening. And for Harry, the humiliation was complete. His jealousy, once hidden behind closed doors, was now exposed. His fears, once dismissed as paranoia, were now on display for others to see. Do you see the irony? The very thing Harry feared most, public humiliation, came true not because he spoke out, but because he stayed silent too long. His restraint broke at the worst possible moment. And Meghan's dismissive laugh turned a private suspicion into a public embarrassment. Now let's step into Sarah's perspective. She had lived through her own humiliations. She knew what it was like to be laughed at in royal circles, to have whispers follow her like shadows. But this was different. This was Harry, Diana's son, the boy the world once pitied, now reduced to a man mocked by his own wife in front of his family. For Sarah, it was unbearable. She says it was the moment she knew she could no longer protect the secret. Because here's the truth, secrets thrive in darkness. But once they're dragged into the light, they demand resolution. Sarah realized that night that the whispers had grown too loud, the evidence too obvious, the humiliation too public. To stay silent was to let Harry drown. And for the first time, she decided she wouldn't stay silent anymore. But let's pause and ask ourselves, was Meghan's laughter really proof of betrayal? Or was it defiance? Was it the laugh of a woman caught off guard? Or the laugh of someone who knew she held all the power? That's what makes this story so layered. Every action, every word, could be interpreted two ways. And in that duality lies the tragedy. After that night, Sarah claims the royal family's private conversations changed. Camilla allegedly fumed. William grew colder toward Harry. Charles, ever cautious, worried about the monarchy's image. And Andrew? Andrew smirked. To him, the whispers were validation. To Meghan, they were a test of control. To Harry, they were shackles tightening around his silence. Sarah says she left that evening shaken. She replayed the moment in her mind over and over. Meghan's laugh. Harry's silence. The guest's stares. And she knew. This was no longer just a family matter. This was a scandal brewing, ready to erupt. But here's the most devastating twist. That night didn't just expose cracks in Harry and Meghan's marriage. It exposed cracks in the monarchy itself. Because if the world learned that Meghan had been linked to Andrew, if the truth spilled out, it wouldn't just be Harry humiliated. It would be the institution itself, dragged back into scandal at a time it could least afford it. And that's where Sarah faced her impossible choice. Protect Meghan, protect Andrew, protect the monarchy, or protect Harry. She couldn't do both. And so, for the first time in years, she chose Harry. She chose to speak. But when she finally opened her mouth, what she revealed wasn't just about Meghan. It wasn't just about Andrew. It was about betrayal in its rawest form. And that revelation was the one that no one, not even Harry, was prepared to hear. What kind of revelation could force Sarah Ferguson, a woman who has carried her own scandals like scars, to finally speak? What truth could be so devastating, so undeniable, that silence was no longer an option? According to Sarah, the answer lies not just in what she saw, but in what she heard. And it happened on a night when the walls of the Sussex's California home were thinner than anyone realized. Sarah claims she was told of an argument so raw, so ferocious, that the echoes of it reached ears they were never intended to. Staff, neighbors, even insiders who had no business hearing the most intimate collapse of a marriage. This wasn't whispers over dinner anymore. This was a war fought in raised voices and shattered trust. Picture the scene. Harry, pacing, his voice rising with each question. Meghan, standing her ground, arms crossed, her tone sharp and dismissive. The subject? The same as always. Andrew, where Meghan had been, who she had spoken to, why she had disappeared again without explanation. Harry's voice, desperate now. Do you think I don't know? Do you think I'm blind? And Meghan's reply? It wasn't denial. It wasn't comfort. It was venom. You're pathetic, Harry. You think the world laughs at me? They laugh at you. You're weak. You're paranoid. You'll never be more than William's shadow. Stop and let that sink in. Imagine your wife, the woman you left your country for, the woman you defended against your family, the woman you staked your entire reputation on. Spitting those words at you. Would you crumble? Would you lash out? Or would you do what Sarah says Harry did? Collapse into silence, a silence so heavy it felt like defeat. Sarah insists these weren't just marital spats. These were attacks designed to break him down. Meghan, in her frustration, weaponizing Harry's deepest insecurities, his fear of irrelevance, his fear of being mocked, his fear of betrayal. And Harry, the soldier, the prince, the man who once walked behind his mother's coffin with unflinching composure, reduced to tears in the safety of his own home. Now, ask yourself, if you were Sarah Ferguson and you knew this, could you really keep it to yourself? Could you let Harry rot in that silence while the world believed their marriage was a fairy tale of love conquering all? Sarah says she couldn't. Not anymore. But here's where the story turns darker still. Because according to Sarah, one of those arguments ended with a phrase so chilling it silenced even Meghan. Harry, broken, whispered through his tears, "If the truth comes out, I'll be destroyed." Destroyed. Not embarrassed. Not hurt. Destroyed. The word carries finality, doesn't it? It suggests that Harry believed exposure of Meghan's alleged closeness with Andrew wouldn't just humiliate him. It would end him. His reputation. His marriage. Maybe even his place in the monarchy, fragile as it already was. And here's the contradiction. Meghan had always presented herself as the victim of secrecy. The woman silenced by the palace. The woman who demanded truth. Yet, in Sarah's telling, she was the one who forced Harry into silence. The one who told him to bury what he saw, what he felt, what he knew. Do you see how twisted that is? The very thing Meghan claimed to despise, silence, became her weapon. Sarah says it was this realization that broke her. She had lived that cycle. She had been mocked, humiliated, betrayed. She had seen what silence does to a person, how it corrodes their sense of self until they're nothing but a hollow shell. And she could no longer watch Harry, Diana's son, her nephew by marriage, suffer that same fate. So she spoke. And when she did, the palace walls shook. But before we get to her exact words, let's ask a harder question. Who else knew? Because if Sarah knew, if staff knew, if even neighbors had caught wind of those screaming matches, then surely others in the royal orbit had suspicions too. William, Charles, Camilla, did they hear the whispers? Did they see Harry's hollow eyes and wonder? Or did they, as Sarah suggests, look the other way to protect the institution? Sarah claims Charles worried most about optics. A scandal involving Meghan and Andrew would be catastrophic, not just for Harry, but for the entire monarchy. Camilla, ever the realist, allegedly urged caution. Better to let Meghan take the heat in private than risk another public implosion. And William? Sarah says his patience with Harry grew thinner with each passing day, not because of Meghan herself, but because of Harry's refusal to face the truth. He knew, Sarah says. He always knew, but he chose silence. This is where the betrayal deepens. Because Harry wasn't just silenced by Meghan. He was silenced by fear, by family, by the crushing weight of a monarchy that would rather bury its scandals than expose them. So when Sarah finally broke ranks and revealed what she knew, it wasn't just an act of defiance. It was an act of war. Against Meghan, against Andrew, against the silence that had poisoned the House of Windsor for generations. And what she revealed wasn't vague. It wasn't suggestive. It was direct. She said, plainly, that Meghan's relationship with Andrew crossed lines it never should have crossed. That she saw moments with her own eyes, heard words with her own ears, and that Harry's jealousy wasn't paranoia. It was truth. The fallout was immediate. Meghan, furious. Harry, devastated. Andrew, smirking as though scandal was his lifeblood. And the monarchy, scrambling once again to contain the flames. But Sarah wasn't finished. Because her revelation, explosive as it was only the beginning. She claimed there was one night, one unforgettable moment, where Harry's worst suspicions were confirmed beyond doubt. And what happened that night was the detail that left even the most loyal royalists speechless. What does it feel like to see your worst fear unfold before your very eyes? To suspect betrayal, to dread humiliation, and then to have that moment arrive with devastating clarity? Sarah Ferguson says that one night, Harry didn't just suspect Meghan's closeness with Andrew. He witnessed it in a way that left no room for denial. And it was that night, she insists, that changed him forever. Imagine it. A royal residence, dimly lit, the kind of place where silence is thicker than the air. Harry, restless, moving through the halls, searching for Meghan after yet another argument. He expected to find her in the garden, perhaps in her private study. But instead, he stumbled upon something he could never unsee. Meghan and Andrew, not in an embrace, not in anything explicitly scandalous, but in a position far too intimate to explain away. Their voices low, their laughter soft, their bodies close. Too close. Sarah says Harry froze. His breath caught. In that instant, every whisper, every doubt, every dismissal Meghan had thrown at him suddenly crystallized into something undeniable. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't insecurity. This was real. Now pause for a second and put yourself in his shoes. What would you do? Do you storm in, demand answers, shatter the illusion on the spot? Or do you back away, your heart pounding, your pride shattering, knowing that confronting it would expose you not just to Meghan, but to the entire world? Sarah claims Harry did the latter. He retreated. He walked away, silent tears blurring his vision, his mind reeling. But that silence didn't protect him. It destroyed him. Because from that night forward, he was no longer the Harry the world once knew. He was a man broken by the one truth he could never admit out loud. Sarah describes seeing him afterward, pale, withdrawn, his eyes hollow. He avoided conversations, avoided confrontation, avoided even her. It was as though the man she had once known, cheeky and full of life, had evaporated, leaving behind only a shadow. And Meghan? She carried on as though nothing had happened, smiling for the cameras, projecting unity while behind closed doors, the fracture deepened. Isn't that the most chilling part of all? The contradiction? A couple who built their brand on authenticity, on telling their truth, allegedly living a lie so profound it threatened to swallow them whole. But here's where Sarah's account grows even darker. Because she insists that Harry, in his silence, began to change in ways that alarmed those closest to him. His temper shortened. His patience with Meghan's dismissals evaporated. And yet, his fear of humiliation kept him from ever saying the words that burned in his chest. He became, as Sarah puts it, a man imprisoned by his own silence. Now let's talk about the emotional toll. Have you ever carried a secret so heavy that it changes the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you breathe? That's what Sarah says happened to Harry. His shoulders hunched as though weighed down by invisible chains. His laughter, when it came at all, sounded forced, brittle, like glass ready to shatter. And in private, Sarah swears, his tears flowed more often than anyone realized. But here's the twist. Meghan allegedly saw this unraveling, and instead of softening, she hardened. Sarah says Meghan doubled down, accusing Harry of weakness, of insecurity, of failing to be the man she needed. "You're too fragile," Meghan allegedly sneered during one late-night argument. "You can't handle the truth." Do you see the cruelty in that? The very truth Harry longed to confront. The truth Meghan had dismissed again and again, thrown back at him as an insult. It's the kind of emotional warfare that doesn't just wound. It obliterates. And Sarah, standing on the sidelines, watching it all unfold, says she could no longer keep the secret. Because this wasn't just about Meghan and Andrew anymore. This was about Harry's very soul. She claims she told a confidant, if he keeps living like this, he'll vanish. He'll disappear into himself. But what about the monarchy? Because we cannot forget, in the royal world, no scandal exists in isolation. Every whisper about Meghan and Andrew, every tear Harry shed, reverberated through the halls of Buckingham and Clarence House. Staff whispered, royals speculated, and the fear wasn't just about Harry's humiliation. It was about the monarchy itself being dragged into another scandal it could never recover from. Sarah insists this is why the silence lasted so long. Not to protect Meghan, not to protect Harry, but to protect the institution. Because if the world ever learned that Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, had been linked in such a way to Prince Andrew, already disgraced, already radioactive, it wouldn't just be a scandal. It would be an earthquake. And so Harry's silence became the monarchy's shield. A shield forged in pain, humiliation, and betrayal. But shields crack. And Sarah says this one was already splintering. Because here's the shocking part. Harry allegedly confided in someone he trusted, someone outside the family, that he no longer believed he could hold it in. If people knew the truth, he whispered, they'd never look at me the same again. And that, Sarah says, is the tragedy. Harry wasn't protecting Meghan out of love. He wasn't protecting Andrew out of loyalty. He was protecting himself from humiliation so complete it would erase him. But Sarah's final words on this chapter are the most haunting of all. She says Harry, broken and silent, once admitted to her directly, "Better they laugh at me as a fool than pity me as a man betrayed." Let that sink in. Better they laugh at me as a fool than pity me as a man betrayed. A prince choosing mockery over truth. A man choosing humiliation over honesty. That, Sarah insists, is the cruelest twist of all. But the story doesn't end there. Because Sarah also claims that Meghan, emboldened by Harry's silence, began to take risks she never would have before. Risks that threatened not just their marriage, but the very fabric of the royal family. And what she did next was the moment that turned whispers into a firestorm. What risks does someone take when they believe they are untouchable? What lines does a person cross when they know their partner will stay silent, no matter how deep the humiliation cuts? According to Sarah Ferguson, Meghan Markle's confidence in Harry's silence didn't just protect her, it emboldened her. It made her reckless. And that recklessness, Sarah insists, is what turned a private suspicion into a firestorm of betrayal that shook everyone who knew even fragments of the truth. Sarah paints the picture with precision. Meghan, already accused of being controlling, allegedly began pushing boundaries more openly. No longer hiding her closeness with Andrew in hushed corners, she allowed the appearances to linger longer. Conversations in public spaces stretched beyond propriety. Smiles lingered. Whispers carried. To outsiders, maybe it looked harmless. But to insiders, To people like Sarah, it looked like defiance. It was as though Meghan was testing the limits. How far could she go before Harry broke? How close could she stand to Andrew without sparking a scandal? How much could she dismiss Harry's jealousy before his suspicion consumed him? These weren't questions asked aloud. They were experiments acted out in real time. And Sarah says Meghan performed them with unnerving precision. Now let's pause here. Why would Meghan take such risks? Was it arrogance? Was it carelessness? Or was it, as Sarah suggests, a calculated demonstration of power? Because in Meghan's world, image was everything. And what stronger display of control than standing beside the very man her husband feared most, daring anyone to speak, knowing no one would. Harry, of course, saw it. He could not see it. But instead of fighting back, he grew quieter, more reserved. Sarah recalls dinners where Harry barely spoke, his head bowed, his smile forced. Meghan, on the other hand, commanded the room, laughing, charming, dazzling. The contrast was painful. The prince looked broken, the Duchess triumphant. And here's the cruel contradiction. The world outside believed Harry had finally found happiness. Free from the institution, free from royal duty, free to live on his own terms. Yet inside those rooms, inside those arguments, Harry was anything but free. He was shackled by silence, by fear, by humiliation he could never admit. Sarah describes one incident that crystallized this shift. At a private event, Meghan and Andrew were spotted in deep conversation while Harry lingered at the edge of the room. Staff noticed. Guests whispered. And when Harry finally approached, Meghan turned to him with that same cold line. "You're imagining things." Andrew smirked, and Harry walked away. Can you imagine the sting of that moment? Your wife dismissing you, your uncle mocking you, and the people around you, the very world you left everything behind for, watching it unfold. Sarah says that moment shattered her, because she saw in Harry's eyes not just jealousy, not just pain, but resignation. The look of a man who had given up fighting. But Meghan's risks didn't stop there. According to Sarah, Meghan began leveraging Andrew's name in subtle ways, reminding Harry that Andrew offered her a perspective on royal life he never could, reminding him that Andrew, disgraced as he was, still understood the palace machine better than Harry ever did. Think about the cruelty of that. A wife comparing her husband unfavorably to his uncle, a prince being told he wasn't enough. And Harry? He swallowed it. Again, because the alternative, confronting her, exposing her, meant humiliation far worse. Sarah insists this was Meghan's weapon, the knowledge that Harry feared pity more than betrayal. She exploited it, over and over, until he became a shell of himself. Now, you may be asking, where was Sarah in all this? Why didn't she speak sooner, if she saw Harry breaking? Sarah admits she wrestled with guilt. She wanted to protect her daughters, her family, her fragile place within the royal orbit. Speaking too soon would have meant war with Meghan, and by extension, Harry. But the guilt gnawed at her. She says every time she saw Harry's hollow smile, every time she saw him shrink in Meghan's presence, she heard her own past screaming back at her. The scandals, the humiliation, the silence that nearly destroyed her. And then came the night that forced her hand. A night Sarah describes as unforgettable. Meghan and Andrew, together at a gathering, again too close, again too comfortable. Harry watching, his face pale, his fists clenched. And then, for the first time, Sarah saw Harry break the pattern. He didn't stay silent. He didn't retreat. He confronted Meghan publicly, his voice cracking with rage. Why him? Why always him? The words hung in the air, electrifying the room. Guests froze. Meghan laughed. Andrew smirked. And Harry's humiliation was complete. That night, Sarah says, she made her choice. She could no longer protect Meghan. She could no longer shield Andrew. She chose Harry. And when she finally opened her mouth, the words came like a blade slicing through years of silence. Harry was right to be suspicious. Meghan and Andrew were too close. I saw it myself. The impact was seismic. Meghan furious. Harry devastated. Andrew defensive. The monarchy rattled. But Sarah wasn't done. Because she claimed there was one final detail, one revelation so damning it couldn't be ignored. And that revelation wasn't about Meghan's laughter. It wasn't about Andrew's smirk. It was about the monarchy itself, and the way it had used Harry's silence as a shield. What Sarah revealed next didn't just incriminate Meghan. It exposed the very system that allowed this betrayal to thrive. What happens when betrayal isn't just personal, but institutional? When silence isn't only the weapon of a spouse, but the policy of an entire monarchy? Sarah Ferguson's decision to finally speak didn't just expose Meghan and Andrew. It exposed the rot of a system that was willing to sacrifice Harry's dignity to keep itself afloat. And that, Sarah claims, is the revelation that shook her most of all. According to her account, the royal family knew more than they ever let on. The whispers about Meghan and Andrew weren't whispers only in staff corridors or private gatherings. They had reached the highest levels. Charles knew. Camilla knew. William knew. Even senior advisors, the kind who polish speeches and manage damage control, knew. And what did they do? They did nothing. Worse, they let Harry carry the burden alone. Sarah insists this was the monarchy's calculation. Better to let Harry appear paranoid, jealous, even weak, than to allow Meghan's alleged closeness with Andrew to become public knowledge. Why? Because the stakes were higher than one man's pride. Andrew was already a liability, his name dragged through the mud globally. If Meghan's name became entangled with his in such a scandal, the monarchy risked a second implosion, one they could never recover from. So they made their choice. Protect the institution. Protect the image. Sacrifice Harry. Do you see how cruel that is? Harry, the boy who lost his mother, the prince who was once the world's darling, became the shield for a monarchy that had no more use for him. His silence wasn't just personal weakness. It was royal strategy. And Meghan, Sarah claims, knew it. That's why she pushed harder. That's why she laughed in his face. Because she knew the system itself was on her side, and that Harry would never risk going against both his wife and his family. Now ask yourself, would you survive that kind of isolation? To look at your wife and see betrayal. To look at your family and see complicity. To realize that the very people who should defend you are instead using you as cover? Sarah says Harry didn't survive it, not in spirit. He became a shell of himself, his once fiery defiance smothered under the weight of silence imposed from every direction. And here's where Sarah's revelation grows even more damning. She claims there were meetings, private conversations among senior royals, where the issue was discussed openly. Not whether Meghan had crossed lines with Andrew, but how to manage it if the truth ever leaked. Imagine that. The monarchy strategizing not around preventing betrayal, but around containing exposure. Sarah describes it as a family more concerned with optics than with blood. Isn't that the cruelest irony? The monarchy that claims to embody tradition, honor, and family unity allegedly reduced one of its own sons to a sacrificial pawn. The boy Diana once called her, good one, left to wither so the crown could shine. But Sarah's voice cuts deeper. She says she remembers the look in Harry's eyes after one of those meetings. Hollow. Defeated. He knew. He knew his silence wasn't protecting Meghan, wasn't protecting Andrew, wasn't even protecting himself. It was protecting them. The firm. The monarchy. The machine. And that knowledge, Sarah insists, broke him more than Meghan's laughter ever could. So why speak now? Why break the silence after years of complicity? Sarah admits the timing isn't coincidence. Meghan is weaker now, her Hollywood dreams faltering, her public image fractured. Andrew is diminished, his influence gone. And Harry, still clinging to relevance, is visibly unraveling under the pressure. Sarah chose this moment because she believes the truth can no longer be buried without destroying what little is left of Harry. But maybe there's more. Maybe Sarah's revelation is also a warning. Because if the monarchy is willing to sacrifice one prince so casually, what does that say about the institution's future? About William? About George, Charlotte, Louis? How many more silences will be demanded? How many more betrayals excused? And let's not ignore Sarah's own contradictions. She claims she's speaking out to protect Harry, but isn't she also protecting herself? By pointing the finger at Meghan and Andrew, she distances herself from Andrew's scandals. By aligning herself with Harry's suffering, she rebrands herself as the aunt who dared to tell the truth. Is that redemption? Or is it strategy? That's for you to decide. Still, her words land like thunder. Meghan wasn't just reckless. Andrew wasn't just complicit. The monarchy wasn't just silent. They were all part of a system that thrived on Harry's humiliation. And that, Sarah claims, is the scandal no one wants to admit. But here's where the story sharpens into its cruelest twist. Sarah says Harry wasn't just silenced. He was warned. Warned that if he ever spoke, if he ever exposed Meghan's closeness with Andrew, the monarchy would cut him off completely. Not just financially, not just ceremonially, emotionally. Family ties severed. No return. Choose silence, he was told, or lose everything. Can you imagine that ultimatum? Silence or exile, betrayal or abandonment. Harry had already lost his mother. Could he really risk losing the rest of his family too? Sarah says that's why he chose silence. Again, and again, and again. But what happens when a man has nothing left to lose? That, Sarah warns, is the danger now. Because Harry's silence, once his prison, is becoming unbearable. And Sarah believes the day may come when he finally breaks. When he tells the truth the monarchy has spent years burying. And if that day comes, the scandal won't just destroy Meghan. It won't just destroy Andrew. It could tear down the very walls of the monarchy itself. Because Sarah claims there's one piece of the story still untold. A piece so explosive, so dangerous,